If you're over 75 and your legs are getting weaker, your balance feels off, and standing up from a chair suddenly feels harder than it used to, there is one major mistake that nearly everyone makes. They assume muscle loss is only a protein problem, so they start drinking protein shakes, they try to eat a little more chicken, maybe a few eggs, maybe some collagen, and when their strength still doesn't come back fast enough, they think, well, I guess this is just aging. But what if that's not the real problem? What if the issue is not just that you need more building blocks for muscle, but that your body has become a bad environment for holding onto muscle in the first place? And this is where one cheap, tiny fruit becomes surprisingly interesting, not because it's packed with protein, not because it's some miracle food, but because it helps support several of the exact things that tend to go wrong when muscle starts disappearing after 75. And the fruit I'm talking about is prunes. Yes, prunes. Not trendy, not expensive, not exciting. But before you dismiss this, you need to understand what really happens to muscle as you age, because once you see that, this whole thing starts to make a lot more sense. Muscle loss after 75 is not just about getting older. It's about a chain reaction. Your muscles don't respond to food the way they used to. Your activity tends to go down. Your appetite often goes down. Your inflammation tends to go up. Recovery gets slower. Balance gets worse. And then one of the biggest problems starts feeding the others. You move less because you feel weaker. And then because you move less, you get even weaker. That condition even has a name. It's called sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss. And it is not some tiny problem that affects only a few people. In older adults, especially by the time people get into their 80s, the numbers climb dramatically. That's why this matters so much. Once muscle goes down, your risk of falling goes up, your walking speed goes down, your independence starts slipping, and suddenly this is no longer about fitness, it's about quality of life. Now here's where most people go wrong. They think, okay, I'm losing muscle, so I just need more protein, and protein is absolutely important. Very important. But protein by itself is often not enough. That's because after a certain age, the body becomes more resistant to the muscle building signal from food. In other words, you can eat protein, but your body may not respond to it the same way it did when you were younger. Think of it like knocking on a door that used to open easily, and now the door is heavier, slower, and harder to move. This is why some people over 75 eat what they think is pretty good, maybe even add a supplement and still don't feel stronger, because the body doesn't just need raw material, it needs the right internal conditions. And that's where prunes become a lot more interesting than people realize. Let's look at what's inside this tiny fruit. Prunes are dried plums. They're small, inexpensive, easy to store, easy to chew for many older adults, and they deliver a concentrated package of nutrients and compounds that matter much more than people think. Just a small serving, about 4 prunes, gives you fiber, potassium, and vitamin K, plus a group of plant compounds called polyphenols. Now, why is that important? Let's start with potassium. Most people hear potassium and immediately think blood pressure, but potassium matters for muscles too. Your muscles and nerves rely on electrolytes to contract and communicate properly. When potassium intake is low, the whole system can become less efficient. You may feel weaker, more fatigued, or just off. Now, I'm not saying prunes alone are going to fix a severe potassium problem. That's not the point. The point is that when an older adult is eating less, skipping meals, or living on toast, crackers, coffee, and maybe one decent meal a day, these small concentrated foods start to matter a lot more. Then there's vitamin K. Most people think muscle is separate from bone, but that's a huge mistake. Muscle and bone are a team. Weak bones make movement harder. Pain makes movement harder. Fear of falling makes movement harder. And when movement goes down, muscle goes down even faster. So when you eat foods that help support bone health, you may also be helping preserve the ability to keep moving. And that is one of the most important ways to protect muscle. And then we get to the most fascinating part, the polyphenols. These are natural plant compounds that help deal with oxidative stress and inflammation. And if you really want to understand why older adults lose muscle, you have to understand that muscle loss is not just a mechanical problem. It's also a biological stress problem. Inflammation changes the environment. Oxidative stress changes the environment. Recovery changes, appetite changes, protein handling changes, everything gets a little less efficient. So the question becomes, can a food help improve that environment? This is where prunes stand out. Researchers have been interested in prunes for years, mostly because of bone health, and the evidence there is actually stronger than most people realize. Human studies and reviews suggest that prunes may help slow bone loss, particularly in older women, and that effect appears to be connected to their unique nutrient profile and their polyphenols. Now, at this point, someone might say, wait a second, I thought this video was about muscle, not bone. Exactly. And that's the misunderstanding. After 75, you cannot separate muscle from bone, from balance, from walking, from confidence, from falls, from pain, from inflammation, from appetite. These are all connected. A person does not lose independence because one lab value changed. They lose it because the whole system starts breaking down together. So when a food supports bone, lowers biological stress, improves regularity, and helps people keep moving, it may help preserve the terrain that muscle needs to survive. But now, let's talk about something even more interesting. There are lab studies on plum extracts showing effects that directly touch muscle pathways. In one study, a polyphenol-rich plum extract increased muscle cell size, increased muscle cell differentiation, increased protein synthesis, reduced protein breakdown, and even increased IGF-1 signaling in the lab. Now, let me be very clear here, because this is where people on the internet start exaggerating. That was not a study of 82-year-old humans eating a few prunes at breakfast. That was laboratory evidence, so we cannot take that and pretend it proves that prunes alone rebuild human muscle. But what it does show is that there are plausible biological reasons researchers keep looking at compounds in plums and prunes. In other words, this is not random. There is a reason this fruit keeps showing up in the conversation. And that brings us to the next massive mistake. People look for one food to do the entire job. That is never how this works. Prunes are not a replacement for protein. They are not a replacement for strength training. They are not a replacement for walking. They are not a replacement for sleep. They are not a replacement for correcting undereating. They are a helper, a very useful helper. And if you use them the right way, they can become part of a very smart muscle preserving strategy. So what is the right way? The wrong way is to eat a bunch of prunes by themselves like candy and expect your thighs to grow back. That's not going to happen. The better way is to use prunes strategically. Here's what I mean. If you're over 75, one of the biggest problems is that you often don't eat enough total food. And even when you do eat, the meal may not contain enough protein to stimulate muscle well. So instead of thinking of prunes as the main event, think of them as part of a muscle support meal. For example, prunes with Greek yogurt, prunes with cottage cheese, prunes alongside eggs and a side of yogurt, prunes chopped into oatmeal that also contains added protein. Prunes with a handful of nuts and a protein-rich snack. Now suddenly you're not just eating fruit, you're building a more complete environment. Protein, minerals, fiber, polyphenols, and energy. And that matters, because one of the hidden reasons older adults lose muscle is simply that eating becomes harder. Appetite drops. Chewing becomes a hassle, digestion slows down, constipation becomes common, meals get smaller, then protein goes down, movement goes down, and muscle quietly disappears. Prunes help with another part of that cycle too. They are well known for helping with regularity because they contain fiber and sorbitol. Now, some people laugh when they hear that, but constipation in older adults is not a small issue. If someone is uncomfortable, bloated, sluggish, or not eating enough because digestion is off, that can absolutely affect how much nutrition they get in over time. So again, prunes are not just about one nutrient. They help from multiple angles. And now let's talk about who may benefit the most from this. If you are over 75 and you notice that your legs feel weaker, your steps are slower, you struggle to get up from a chair, you're less steady, you don't eat much at breakfast, you feel full quickly, or you've started moving less because your body just feels older all of a sudden, this is the kind of person who should pay attention. Especially if you're doing okay, but not great, because that's where a lot of muscle loss hides. Not in total collapse, in the slow drift, the quiet decline, the I'm just not as strong as I was 6 months ago. And those are the people who need to act before the fall, not after it. Now let's be practical. How much? A simple starting point is about 4 prunes a day. That amount is realistic, inexpensive, and easy for most people. Some studies on bone health have used higher amounts, but that doesn't mean everyone needs to start there. In fact, too many prunes too fast can backfire because of the fiber and sorbitol. Then you end up with bloating, gas, or loose stools, and people quit before they ever get consistent. So start lower. Be consistent. Let your body adapt, and most importantly, do not do this alone. Pair it with protein. That is the key. Because if you only remember one thing from this video, remember this: the fruit is not the builder. The fruit helps create the conditions. Protein is the building material. Resistance exercise is the signal. And movement is the preservation system. You need all three. That's why the older adult who eats a little protein, adds a few prunes, walks daily, and does even simple resistance work, chair stands, step-ups, resistance bands, wall push-ups, light weights, is in a much better position than the person searching for one magical superfood. Even the National Institute on Aging emphasizes that older adults need enough protein throughout the day to help maintain muscle, and that strength training belongs in the routine. And this is the part a lot of people miss. Benefits can happen even in adults over 75, even in frailer individuals, as long as the exercise is appropriate. So no, it is not too late. That's one of the biggest lies people start believing. It's too late for me. No, it's not. Harder? Yes. Slower? Yes. But too late? No. And there's another detail here that I think is really important. Prunes are cheap. This matters because a lot of older adults are being sold expensive powders, fancy drinks, amino acid formulas, and senior muscle supplements that cost a fortune. Meanwhile, some of the most useful tools are sitting in a grocery store in a bag for a few dollars. That doesn't mean prunes are stronger than a high-quality protein source. They're not. It means they are one of the most accessible supportive foods you can add without making life more complicated. And older adults do better when the strategy is simple enough to repeat. Complex plans fail. Simple plans stick. Now, are there any cautions? Yes. If you have diabetes or blood sugar issues, portion size still matters. Prunes are not candy, but they are still a dried fruit, and dried fruit is more concentrated. If you have kidney disease or you've been told to limit potassium, talk with your doctor before making large changes. If you are on warfarin or another medication affected by vitamin K, consistency matters, so don't suddenly go from 0 to large amounts without checking. And if your gut is very sensitive, start with a smaller amount. That's how you do this intelligently. Not emotionally, not because a headline told you prunes are magic, but because you understand the system. And when you understand the system, you stop asking, what food builds muscle? And you start asking a much better question. What helps my body respond better to the things that preserve muscle? That is the real question. And the answer is enough protein, resistance exercise, daily movement, and strategic foods that support the entire environment. Prunes happen to be one of those foods. Tiny, cheap, easy, underrated. So if you're over 75 and you want a simple place to start, here's the basic formula. Add 4 prunes a day, pair them with a protein-rich meal or snack. Do some form of strength work at least a couple times a week. Walk or move daily and stay consistent long enough to notice what changes. Not for one day, not for 3 days. Give it a few weeks. Then look at the real signs. Is it easier to get out of a chair? Do stairs feel a little less heavy? Are you walking with more confidence? Do your legs feel less shaky? Is your appetite a little better because your digestion is better? That's how you measure progress. Because muscle loss doesn't usually happen overnight, and rebuilding confidence doesn't happen overnight either, but it can happen. And sometimes it starts with one small change that seems way too simple to matter. That cheap, tiny fruit might not look powerful, but when you understand what it's doing in the background, it becomes a lot more impressive. I'm Dr. Ethan, and if you want to know the best protein strategy after 70 Sasha, because most older adults are still doing that part wrong too, make sure you watch my next video. It may completely change how you eat for strength, recovery, and healthy aging.